Hello, everyone. My guest on this episode is Dr. Eric Feigl-Ding. Eric is a former researcher at Harvard University and holds doctorates in both epidemiology and nutrition. Throughout the course of the pandemic, he has been a quite prominent commentator and analyst on COVID-19. And in doing so over the past year and a half or so, he's also found himself quite maligned by some of the other commentators and scientists for being too overreactive. He gets epithets thrown at him like alarmist and things of that sort. But for the most part, he's turned out to be right on most of these issues. And his so-called overreactions have had quite a degree of foresight. So we discussed that, the precautionary principle, how politics has infected the pandemic. Sorry for the pun there. Political divisiveness apropos to the pandemic. And these new, not-so-friendly variants that we have now coming our way, along with Delta and Delta Plus and Lambda. I'm sure there will be more. And I'll note as well, Eric mentions at one point the follow the science political mantra that's surrounded discourse around the pandemic. And I hope this is something that I discuss more in the program down the road. As I've seen more and more as time has gone on here, that science becomes, to a degree, less of a method and more of sort of like this monolithic entity, as if there is not science, a process of rigor, but the science. It's almost a parody of itself, as if it's become this character out of a Douglas Adams novel or something. The science. And sadly, I'll see people use that concept to uphold their rigidity and shut down discourse. And again, as I mentioned, I hope to discuss this more in the program going forward. And maybe I'll just, for longtime listeners of the show, I used to ramble a lot more at the beginning and try to shorten it up for everybody's mental health and mental well-being. Can only handle my bullshit for so long, but perhaps this is something I'll address on my own accord. The mindset that's solidified itself with many people that's become not very helpful. So just a general note there, everybody. Try to keep more of an open mind about things, and your righteousness is not an adequate proxy for an argument. Anyway, I think I'll leave that there for now. Yep, enough of me. Enjoy the episode, everybody. Cheers, guys. All right, well, thanks for doing this, Eric. First, let's start off, let's jump back over a year ago. When did you start doing analysis into COVID? And did you foresee at the beginning that we would be at the state that we're in and the sort of political reaction that accrued as a result of it all, and how divisive things have gotten?
Yeah, I think it's been a very long year and a half. The pandemic really kind of, in my mind, started around January. And I've been, my Holy Mother of God, warning that this is going to be a thermonuclear level pandemic was in late January, January 24th. I was really upset that the WHO did not declare public health emergency and international concern a day or two before that. And I was really, I was trying to basically, there's a lot of signals coming out of China that many Western media and Western scientists don't really see. And so having relatives in China, gave me some, ear to the ground there that this was not normal. This is not something that Chinese Communist Party has control over. And, the data and the actual anecdotes coming out were completely on a different scale. And of course, once we saw the preprint about the R naughts, It was like the first paper was like 3.8. And, 3.8 is about what we think it is, right? Between 3 and 4, closer to 4, actually. Because the Delta variant right now, they think it's twice as infectious, and they say that's about, 6 to 8. So 2x. I've been doing this for way longer than we should, way longer than I want. It's cost a lot of, personal heartache, in many ways that I won't go into. And I think
trillions.
And trillions of dollars, millions of people's lives lost, tens of millions of people, hundreds of millions of people's lives, really, really hurt by the virus. And of course, billions of people's lives completely, turned upside down. And this pandemic is not on a scale that we've ever seen before. And we've probably already exceeded the death toll in many ways of the 1918 pandemic. And so I think we're not done yet, right? The Delta variant is almost a 2.0 version of this pandemic. Scene one was when the vaccine came out and all the other strains kind of died out. Act two is basically the Delta variant, marching forth. It doesn't give a damn how much vaccine you got. It's slowed down a bit by the vaccine, but it's going to keep chugging. And at the height of the India second wave, IHME, Institute of Health Metrics and Evaluation, University of Washington, was thinking there was 10 to 14 million new cases per day in India. And the total death count in India is probably between 1 to 3 million people. Yeah. We'll never know exactly for sure, but it's honestly on the scale of 7 figures, number of deaths.
Definitely. And
that's the Delta variant. It's horrendous, and we're still at it, and we're still politically fighting. U.S., the virus dropped in on the worst possible presidency that a pandemic could drop in on. And it's the cascade effect is still going on. And right now, the pandemic has fallen on the worst possible prime minister period in Great Britain. And again, the pandemic is going to keep rolling on. Same with Brazil and all these other countries. So it's really unfortunate that the politics of it is just as horrible as the biology of it.
Yeah, maybe Anthony Eden and Neville Chamberlain will go up a few notches in the ranks in the history of Britain. So we'll see how that goes. But you gave me a couple good things to launch off of. First, I like how you put this into acts, and noting that this could very easily be sort of a second act in a dark play of who knows how many acts, but in the United States, the idea is that this is all over, and the pandemic's pretty much done. And President Biden said something along the lines of, "What was it? We have independence from the virus at this point in time." So, what is your perception? And I've been talking to a lot of people about this. And this sort of mentality has been going on for a while, like with when the vaccines first were at the end of the trials in November. People are already saying, "Oh, it's over." It's just a matter of time now. So, what are your thoughts on people, mainly in the United States and Canada and Britain, who think that it's done? It's just a few more weeks and there'll be enough immunity, and then we just got to worry about getting vaccines to Africa and India.
Yeah, I think first of all, it's no longer this it's all fine kind of dandy kind of attitudes. It's not just on the right who, they thought it was a hoax to begin with, or that it's overblown and it's, it's just a flu, that crowd. But even among it was serious last year, but now it's fine. Those I would call the sheltered, bubbled, elitist liberals who think that have just not been following what's been happening in India, not been following what's been happening in countless other countries. And look, cases are surging in Israel, where 60%, 60% are fully vaccinated with, the double Pfizer. UK is at, 50% almost, with 2/3 AstraZeneca, 1/3 Pfizer. But both of them are seeing case rises. Both are seeing hospitalization rises. Let's put it in perspective. Scotland has more cases per capita per day now than it ever had ever in the past in the pandemic, even more than even the winter surge. Yeah, Scotland has more.
Wow.
Scotland's hospitals, its largest hospital in northern Scotland, is now maxed out. They're in code black. No more elective surgeries. They're completely maxed out. That's Scotland right now, and Scotland is more vaccinated than Lower England, by the way, and UK is going to open up on July 19th, and it will just be abominable. More vaccinated than US. Hospitalizations are soaring. Mechanical ventilation ICU cases are soaring. These numbers do not lie. Some people can still say, there's still now a new crew of people saying, oh, this is a case-demic, or, oh, there's a divergence of cases and hospitalization. First of all, there's a damn lag. Anyone who understands epidemiology know that, hospitalizations do not immediately rise with cases. There's a lag of 2 or 3 weeks. On hospitalizations, there's a lag of 3 or 4 weeks. But and deaths, 3 to 4 weeks. But right now, all of that is going up, and you cannot deny it. And anyone who tries to, they use some fancy graph. Like basically, if you graph the peak of the winter, well, our current rise is just a tiny, tiny rise. But they're ignoring the nature of exponential math. Exponential math always starts out slow. Like, the example of the rice on the chessboard. The emperor, the king asks, what do you want as payment? It's just 1 grain of rice, but you double it per chessboard piece. And the emperor says yes. But by the time you get to the end of the 64 chessboard, there's more rice that the king owes than all of the rice in the entire kingdom. But it starts out slow. 1, 2, 4, 8. Those numbers are not skyrocketing numbers. Those are numbers that most people just shrug off. But policy leaders don't understand that. Epidemiologists and mathematicians, statisticians realize if it's exponential, it's exponential at the low level, just as it's exponential. Most policy leaders only think of exponential when the curve starts looking really steep vertically, which, by the way, you can make it less steep by changing the axis very easily. That's a very simple, if you compress 10 days into a short thing, you can make it look very steep. Look, this is exponential, means that unless you do something radically different, it will keep increasing on an exponential rate, right? The definition of idiocy is thinking of trying to do the same thing and thinking that it won't be any different. I'm probably bastardizing the quote, but you probably know what I'm talking about.
It's pretty close.
Basically, if it's exponentially growing, and the mathematics of this is always exponential, where 1 person with the original strain, 1 person infects 3. Each of those infects 3 more. Each of those infects 3 more. It becomes 1 to 3 to 9 to 27, right? That number will just balloon very quickly. And now it balloons even faster, because with an R naught of 6 to 8, let's just say 7, it's 1 to 7. By generation 2, you're not at 9, you're at 49. By the next generation, you're at, God, I can't do math right now, but you're at 340 something, 343. That is just, that kind of explosion is just something that policy leaders don't understand. They don't understand that if you somehow maintain the course, that it will be any different. Soon, they say, well, right now, Boris Johnson's argument is, well, our hospitals, we have capacity. We might as well get people sick now than in the winter. By the way, his new healthcare minister, the previous one, resigned because of a cheating sex scandal,
the photograph,
which is hilarious. But the new one's actually worse. Actually, I liked Hancock after a whole year. In certain ways, he did follow precautionary principle when the alpha started coming along and they locked down early. But the new one is horrible. The new one, Javid, he's an avid Fountainhead fan. Ayn Rand's Fountainhead book fan. That tells you all you need to know about how his attitude will be when it comes to this COVID. And there's long COVID issues. 1 in 7 adults and 1 in 12 children will have long-term COVID long-haul symptoms. That's not captured by deaths or hospitalizations, by the way. And the news and the math are both abominable, and the policy decision to keep things open will lead to greater suffering. And when it comes to, I've heard during the pandemic from so many leaders, Mexico to so many other countries, they said, well, we don't need to lock down. Our hospital beds are not full. We still got hospital beds. We don't need to do anything. If that was the policy of anything, why do we have seatbelt laws? Why do we have helmet laws? Why do we have speeding laws? Why do we have gun control laws? We could say, well, we don't need any of these restrictions because the hospital beds are not overloaded. Mm-hmm. That is not in any way a public health, morally ethical position, nor a medically ethical position in any universe. But right now, it's being used to justify basically, population democide, basically. It's pandemicide, some people call it, right? That's their approach. And, and burnout, and we're not even talking about all the other infections, but the actual psychological burnout, the PTSD suffered by nurses, doctors, respiratory therapists, all these healthcare workers is immeasurable. And again, the Fountainhead fans of the world, let's just say, are just completely ignoring that. And it's just so disgusting. And of course, so now back to the US thing, there are people who are just saying the vaccine will work. In certain ways, among the liberal group, we vaccinate a lot. That's good. But in certain ways, we oversold vaccinations. Vaccinations are great, but remember, we need 2 doses, not 1 dose. The 70% 1 dose criteria was very risky because we know that with the Delta variant, 1 dose is not enough. The Delta variant, 1 dose with Pfizer, it's about 30% efficacy. With AstraZeneca, 1 dose is about 18% efficacy against infection. Now, 30% for symptomatic infection, but 18%, but that's junk. 18% is junk. And I don't need to tell anyone about if you have 18% protection efficacy from a vaccine, you're basically not protected. And again, also, even though you're still pretty good for more protection against deaths with 2 doses, about 93%, which, by the way, is no longer 98%. Israel used to find 98%. Israel used to find 98%, but now it's dropped to 93%. That's a serious concern. And you can say that's 93, 94% still good, but I would say if you have someone immunocompromised at home, that is not good. That is not an acceptable level of risk. And furthermore, even if it's like 60% AstraZeneca for total infection, 64% according to the Israel study, but Scotland got 79% for 2-dose Pfizer. That's still incredibly leaky. I would never play Russian roulette with those odds. And I wouldn't play Russian roulette with those odds with children at home that are not vaccinated. Elderly at home who have waning immunity, and that's why UK, by the way, is going with a 3rd dose starting in September for all adults over the age of 50. They know that those over the age of 50 have waning immunity. And by the way, that's the other thing that we've kind of advertised, that the vaccine works, but it does wane among the elderly. It does wane. This is why they're doing the 3rd dose push. And Israel is also considering it. But we've kind of oversold that, vaccines are great. Yes, they're great, but you're still going to transmit. half the people, US is what, 320 million people? You divide that by half. That's how much people are not fully vaccinated, not fully protected from Delta. And then you have to assume that with the other half, that it's leaky. The efficacy is with 2-dose Pfizer, like anywhere from like 64 to 79%, between the different studies. That's incredibly leaky. And so the virus will keep going through the population. And even if we increase our vaccination from 48% fully vaccinated in the US to 60%, which is Israel's still seeing a surge. They're still seeing hospital cases rise. The Delta variant has told us that those people who say 60% is all we need for herd immunity, no, it's not true. With a more contagious virus, you need 85% or more. I would say maybe even 90. There's a study from the Robert Koch Institute in Germany today that says we need 90% for those over the age of 65. And I kind of agree, because we need 85, 90%. And at that level, you can then release on the break. But because what herd immunity means, it's not the immunity in which all cases stop. It is the level in which there is an auto braking system that will slow the growth and keep growth under 1 for the most part. But until you get to that point, you can't release the brakes, because the auto braking system of herd immunity against viruses or more contagious viruses only kicks in near there. So if you're saying at 60%, but your target goal is 90% of auto braking, you're not 2/3 of the transmission decrease. The system doesn't work like that. Herd immunity doesn't kick in unless you're within 5 to 10% of the threshold. So unless you get to like 75, 80% of that, I would not say there would be any herd immunity, partial herd immunity at all. That's not how herd immunity works. And this is where, when you have half the population unvaccinated and the other half only have 64 to 79% efficacy, let's just say 70%, that is just not enough. You would not play Russian roulette with those odds, and we shouldn't play Russian roulette with our children's futures. Even if their cases are low, 1 in 12 kids get long COVID. You don't want to play those odds, and this is why we need to mask, mitigate, ventilate, air clean, and basically have distancing and other measures in addition to vaccines until we get to the 85, 90%.
So up here in Canada, like I've noticed, there's quite an inordinate gap between first doses and second doses compared to anywhere else, and there was a real hyper focus on the first doses, and I found that all to be political. You get enough people with first doses, and the numbers look nice and fluffy, and they get to display that. But in the United States, is the lack of second doses more that? Has there been a bit of indifference to getting the second dose?
The U.S. has hit what we call the hesitancy frontier. It's really bad. There are states, by the way, the correlation, someone did it. If you map each state's percent Trump votes and percent fully vaccinated, the correlation, the R square, by the way, is 0.71, the R square. So the actual correlation, Pearson's correlation coefficient, is in the range of like 0.8, which is incredible. Like, that's an incredible correlation. But that also means that the states that have really high Trump votes, their actual fully vaccinated statewide average is in the 30s for some of these states, 30% fully vaccinated. And if you look in some of these counties, in the rural counties, there's some counties with less than 10. Like, those are rare, but still, there's a lot of counties with less than 15% fully vaccinated. It is abysmally low. And we see it also in Missouri. Missouri, their hospitalizations, the case has been soaring. The hospitalization's been soaring. There are hospitals that are now diverting. Springfield, Missouri hospital is so full, it is diverting to other hospitals in other states. It's full. They're ordering another ICU ward. It's just insane. The crisis is full blown in Missouri, and as well as entering crisis stage in Arkansas and Oklahoma. and Nevada is also seeing surges as well. But Missouri is the epicenter right now, and it is bad. We're running out of people. Like, they're shutting down FEMA vaccine centers because there's no demand anymore. CVS and Walgreens are basically cutting the vaccine slots because there's no demand, and it's quite sad, actually.
So, two things on that. First, if President Trump was still in office, do you think that there would be, as much as you don't want to imagine that, would there be more favorability to the vaccines in some of those Republican-heavy counties? And then the second, with President Biden in office, is that's what's allowing what you referred to at the beginning of the conversation, or the liberal elites having more of a rosy outlook to the present situation?
That's a very loaded and multifactorial question. I think, first of all, if Trump was in office, would the conservative states and counties vaccinate more?
Yeah.
In certain ways, I'm not sure, because Trump never advertised that he got the vaccine, even though he did. We know quietly that he did from media reports, although they will say it's fake news. But we know he did. But the issue right now, the biggest irony is that, the conservatives say, the vaccines were brought to you by President Trump. Thank you, President Trump. As if he invented it. Okay. Fine. All right. If you want to thank President Trump the vaccines, then take it. But those people who are the loudest arguing for thank President Trump for vaccine, these counties, these states, the correlation again is, Pearson's correlation is over 0.8. They just not take it. They're just not taking it. So I'm not sure if he was in president, if they would take it at the same number, maybe a 5%, but nothing on the scale. You're not going to bring a 15-20% vaccinated area up to 50% or 60% like Israel. That's just not happening, right? And that's incredibly sad. As for the liberal bubble, I'm not sure. We know the vaccine works. In certain ways, there might be, greater skepticism of the CDC. So right now, in certain ways, with the Biden CDC saying you don't need a mask, which is completely opposite of what the WHO advises. WHO says if you're vaccinated, you should still mask. In certain ways, the Biden CDC saying you not need a mask has made liberal elites, and many people I know, very, very complacent. That CDC says we don't do it. It's not Trump CDC. It's a Biden CDC. It must be guided by science, and it is, but it's not the most precautionary science. Science, there's a range, right, of opinions. It's not the most precautionary science, and in certain ways, that's lulled a lot of the liberal elites into thinking everything's fine and dandy. If it wasn't, the CDC wouldn't be telling us to do this. All this. Anyways, I think, if I was running pandemic response and pandemic comms, I would do things, many things differently, let's just say.
Yeah. And on that versus like sort of the immediate empiricism versus, gauging risk more so, like you mentioned that not really enacting or not really taking on the precautionary principles, what a lot of political leaders would take on. But I've seen that with a lot of scientific experts would also take that approach. Wait till what the data sees, and then act accordingly. Yeah. And that's been what you've been against for a year and a half.
No. I'm saying, that look, the science, there's emerging science, just like from China. Dr. Mike Ryan, I want to first quote, is the best. He's the head of emergency programs at WHO headquarters. He says that in all my decades of pandemic response, the greatest problem is the failure to act quickly. If you want to wait until you're 100% sure that you're right before you act, you will lose the pandemic. you will lose an outbreak and the control. Don't let perfect be the enemy of good, right? Like, if you have to move based on imperfect information, that is the nature of pandemic control. And that is kind of like anti-academia science philosophy. Academics, they don't want to say it, make any bold conclusions until they have a mountain of irrefutable evidence, which normally for most things, does this XYZ cause cancer? You can take that approach, right? Mm-hmm. Cancer is not a fast burning thing. Cancer is always going on, and you can try to find a cure, but you want to be cautious and slowly find a cure. That's fine. But for a pandemic, that kind of attitude, that kind of cover your ass attitude, that I don't dare speak what's actually in my head and on my mind of things that could stop the pandemic and save lives, because I'm trying to protect my ass and protect my reputation. And that is what will get people killed. In certain ways, many scientists are not brave enough to do this. I've left academia. I've had my academia career for a long time, top cited scientists worldwide, but I'm not interested in citations or that kind of academia tenure track kind of thing. Mm-hmm. I care about policy change and driving public policy, public health action. And I have enough buffer that I could, you know how some people say you have enough to give 0 F's about something, right? Mm-hmm. And in certain ways, where I am in my career, I can basically, say, no, I don't give a damn about my academia reputation, And of course, when I first said the Holy Mother God, this is going to be a thermonuclear level pandemic on a scale not seen since 1918 pandemic of millions dead and blah, 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 people hated me for the first month or two. People thought I was just, said really mean things like charlatan, attention-seeking whore. They said everything under the sun. I wasn't famous in any way. So, I just took it off the chin. I had nothing. During the whole pandemic, I've no books to promote, no website to promote. I had one Patreon for one weekend, like 14 months in, as an experiment for Twitter by their request. Yeah. They requested me to try out the new feature. Okay. I deleted it because it wasn't what I am. But I have nothing. I'm not trying to peddle any merch. I'm not trying to profit off of anything. No website, no YouTube channel. Maybe someday, but I do not really care for these things. I just want to share good information, and I think in many ways, you can badmouth me all you want, but at the end of the day, I just want to save lives, and people who know me and gotten to know me know that that's why I care for. So, but to get that redemption, it's a very sobering kind of redemption arc, basically. For what I said to become true, a really horrific thing had to happen to this world. Mm-hmm. And that thing did happen. It's not like I wished it. It's not like I wanted that reputational damage for the first few months. But here we are. And here we are literally still, not just in March of 2020 when people woke up. We're in July of 2021, and there's still people, eyes wide shut and half asleep and, ostrich with their head in the sand, mm-hmm. especially as Delta is coming, and they think they're still in the end of Act 1. We're in the start of Act 2, baby, and this Act 2 is going to be worse than the Act 1 because the complacency will actually kill more in many ways.
As it is already done. Now, You mentioned that you're no longer in the academy anymore. So is maybe that some of the reason that you have some people coming after you is they're in the academy and you're outside of it? And, who's this outsider to, say this, that, and the other
academia, thing? Academia has, there's a lot of lane checking. We call it lane checking, but I remind people, first of all, a virologist is not an epidemiologist. Virologist is a molecular biologist of viruses. You're not a person who understands all the confounding structures of population health data like epidemiologists do. That's what we specialize in. Now, some people say, well, you're not an infectious disease epidemiologist. My first doctorate was in epidemiology proper. It's the same doctoral exam as all these other people. There's a lot of academic checking. And then you're not MD. I guarantee you most MDs know next to nothing about epidemiology, right? And their virology is pretty rudimentary, So, and then of course there's the tax of political tax, because I went on the offensive with Mexico for what the hell are you guys doing? You guys are not doing any testing. So the former Minister of Health, Julio Frank, who used to be the dean at Harvard when I was there, he agreed with me. But the current coronavirus czar, Lopez-Gatell, he's part of we don't need a test. Our hospital beds are not full. That. And lo and behold, Mexico has really horrendous deaths. And of course, Bolsonaro, I've attacked, their policies there. He's made fun of people vaccinated could turn into, he joked, but in a weird way, that you could turn into a reptile. It's crazy.
When did he do that?
And then, of course, he promotes hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin, both of which are not proven. And then, of course, there's Putin. There's lots of risk. As we know, there's Russian misinformation and disinformation actively on vaccines. There's countless people. And of course, India really dropped the ball, right? So many people have died in India. And of course, whenever you go on the political offensive against these people, they have their networks to try to smear you. But in certain ways, I'm not touched. They can't touch me, right? As long as I don't set foot in those countries for the next few years, they can't touch me.
No trips to Rio.
No trips to Rio for a while. No trips to Russia. No trips to India for a while. Look, it's obviously my profile was grown totally by accident, but the more it grows, the bigger the target you become, right? And it's part of this. Many scientists, there's only a few scientists I would say that's gotten more. Fauci got attacked a lot. Dr. Peter Hotez has gotten attacked even more than I have. But for the most part, it's scientists being attacked is now like political football on Fox News, among right-wing outlets, among political bad actors who try to write a smear hit piece or anything like that. They could write all that. They've written crazy things that I'm anti-vax, and I have no idea where the hell anyone who knows me knows I'm not an anti-vax. I'm the biggest vaccine proponent. But this is the nature of this pandemic. It is highly, highly political polarized. It is, even among those who are not, conspiracy theorists, there's enormous amount of disagreement. Enormous. Every scientist has their own personal biases, political leanings, libertarian, leanings, and many of what they believe is the best policy radically differs from another scientist. So in certain ways, follow the science. It's a very subjective word. You can find a good scientist. You could find a bad one, a bad actor. You could find those who want to cherry pick one specific data. My favorite example was actually just recently UK, the hospitalizations are on the rise, right? But there was this 1 week of lull in June 21st to June 27th. I know the exact period in which there was a slight drop for a few, it was, in certain ways, there was other things going on. There was the soccer tournaments and everything, and people were partying and didn't want to go to the hospital, all these other things. But then, it was like March up, a short dip, and then up. But of course, the bad actors pick up the UK report that, they report the hospitalization change per week. This week, there was no increase in hospitalization. In this narrow week, that's technically true. But if you look at the grand march, it's a march forward. It's a march upward, very sharp march. But there's cherry pickers who, it's technically correct. It did not increase during that week. But if you look at the greater trend, it's been increasing 6 out of 7 weeks and very sharply across all regions. It's not like a single blip of one region. It's across all of England, all of Scotland. You can't deny it. But there are people who are scientists who are pro reopening, right? Pro natural infection herd, who thinks natural infection is the greatest salvation. Scott Atlas, as you remember, was an MD, Trump's pandemic advisor, right? Mm-hmm. You can find doctors and scientists who say almost anything during a pandemic. It doesn't make it right, but politically, everyone has political motivations oftentimes. I will say everyone has political opinions, and many of scientists have political motivations. And, also denial of transmission in children is also one of those atrocious things that kids don't transmit. Kids are practically immunized. People have actually written that in major newspapers. And it was just the most horrendous thing. And of course, a week or two, I called for that, for the Atlantic to track that paper. They didn't. It got a lot of traction. Many scientists agreed with me. But of course, the scientist who wrote that article, of course, 2 weeks later, 3 weeks or a month later, starts attacking me on various nitpicking things as retribution for attacking her. This is, and then, by the way, I was not attacking her. I was calling it, outright false. There's subjective things. There's, cherry pick things, and there's outright falsehoods. I called that one out because it's an all outright falsehood. It's just.
Who wrote that one?
This is a very long pandemic.
Who wrote that one? Who wrote that one in the Atlantic?
I don't want to get into it.
Oh, okay. I was just curious. But before I let you go, I want to jump into two other things. Like you mentioned Delta a whole bunch and all the issues surrounding that, but we have two other friendly little variants that are knocking on our doors. There's the Delta Plus, and now there's more attention being paid to the Lambda variant, if I have that correct. That's coming out of Peru. So what concerns do you have with those two? And do you know any specifics about them? I think it's still too early from what I've seen.
I think it's still too early. Yeah. Delta Plus has the mutations of Delta plus another bad mutation. But, from a precautionary principle, we got to be careful. India raised it as a variant of concern, but WHO still has not. But in certain ways, we did not know how dangerous Delta was because we didn't have sequencing, genome, laboratory capacity, and good epidemiology in India. So, we're still kind of in the dark about that. Lambda, emerged from Peru. Peru also has no testing capacity or genome sequencing capacity like, UK or US does. So it's still a big mystery. Now it's in 30 countries, I believe, including the UK, as well as the US and Chile and many other neighboring countries. As worrisome mutations, from, pandemic precautionary perspective, yes, I agree we need to be cautious. And Peru is one of the highest excess mortality countries during the pandemic. No, actually, it is, I think, one of, number 1, 2, one of the highest excess mortality countries. So, Peru is not a laughing matter. A variant that rises from Peru is definitely more worrisome than a variant that rises from, say, Canada, because I don't think Canada is going to see a really bad variant per se, because Canada's not let the virus burn through. Although I can't say that much for British Columbia and Alberta, because God, British Columbia's chief health officer, Dr. Bonnie Henry, Bonnie Henry is just one of the densest. Like, she was denied airborne for the longest time. She denied P1 was more infectious. She denied that P1 had reinfection potential. She denied still that Delta is more severe. Like, she, in certain ways, she reads the literature of those denialists. We call them not denialists, but downplayers.
Right.
The downplaying crew of COVID, of the it's all fine, it's rosy, everything's great kind of thing. And of course, just not everyone reads academic literature. I spent my early career in academia. I used to teach meta-analysis. So whenever you teach meta-analysis and systematic reviews, what you literally do is read papers. Like, years ago, I did one of the largest meta-analysis on Vioxx. I don't know if you remember that drug, pain drug, Vioxx, Celebrex.
Celebrex,
Yeah. They're COX-2 inhibitors. I did one of the largest meta-analysis. I was one of the whistleblowers, several. I wasn't the only one. But God, I poured through so many papers and studies. Like, you need to know how to read these studies and decipher. And most people are not epidemiologically trained. Most MDs are not trained in reading papers, right? Trained in reading epidemiology papers. Just like I'm not trained in reading virology papers per se. Like, I can figure it out, but I wouldn't really know that this is the wrong method, right? This is a bad study because they use the wrong method. I wouldn't know that in virology, but I would know that in epidemiology. You show me an epidemiology study, and I said, well, this is a trashy study. But most of these public health doctors have no experience in this. And Bonnie Henry is one of those people who she just parrots almost what she says with natural infection, blah, 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 not airborne, no, kids don't transmit, we don't need to mask kids, Delta variant is not so more severe, P1's blah, 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 is not more infectious, but all this stuff comes from the same, what was called Great Barrington friendly or Great Barrington adjacent curious, pro-infection, pro-reopening crowd. They're not like outright conspiracy theorists. They're not like outright, right-wing smearing people, but they are clearly downplayers. And one thing we know that during the pandemic, downplaying is what has gotten us into this mess, right?
Yeah.
The downplaying is what led the UK to delay, border quarantines and travel, testing and, travel restrictions for different countries and slow lockdowns, weak lockdowns. All these things were a function of these downplaying people. And that's the greatest, saddest thing, that science is science, but science can be easily bastardized, easily twisted, easily using a narrow focus window to describe what they want their worldview is, and to cherry pick what they want as their narrative.
Yeah, and that's happened quite a bit, and stupidity has really crossed partisanship. Like you mentioned, all the problems with British Columbia, which are massive, and and so you have, just like in Sweden with the government in British Columbia, you have the Social Democrats, but yet they're just their policies aren't.
All you need is one. There's many like liberal scientists who are just not. They're like, some are based in San Francisco. the one that basically said, "Oh, hospitalization is not going up; it's flat or going down." That's a San Francisco, like liberal scientist.
Mm.
It's just oh, by the way, that same scientist had said India had already achieved herd immunity. India will not have a second wave. Back in January, February. Boy, was that person wrong. I won't name names, but oh my God, that person has led to so much strife and hurt and so much damage. And this downplaying, dismissing is what literally allows this pandemic to keep going. If we went for zero COVID precautionary principle, we weren't, early on, we didn't know if there was human-to-human transmission, but we could take a precaution. We didn't know if there was asymptomatic transmission, but we could take a precaution, even though there's a lot of evidence. We weren't sure if 14 days is long enough. We weren't as quarantine. We weren't sure if testing negative means that you're actually negative. We weren't sure about so many things. But had we taken the precautionary principle, we wouldn't be in this place. And of course, the greatest thing was airborne denial. Airborne transmission denial was part of the lexicon from a lot of these, not just Bonnie Henry, but a lot of these traditional mainline virologists and infectious disease doctors, which, by the way, airborne transmission is a field of environmental engineering. So the world experts in airborne particles are the environmental engineers, the aerosol scientists. These are climate engineers, environmental building design, ventilation engineers. These are the world experts in airborne viruses, not a molecular biologist or a geneticist. A molecular biologist or geneticist is not an expert in airborne virus transmission dynamics whatsoever. But yet they were the one who were the most cited because, they're virus experts. Yeah, they're geneticists and molecular biologists of viruses, not airborne transmission dynamics of viruses. And they weren't heard, and the aerosol scientists were not heard for the longest time. And it's the greatest tragedy that these experts who actually know what they're talking about were silenced by the old. There's entire articles written on this, how the hell we screwed this up. But they were silenced by the old guard of virologists and infectious disease epidemiologists. So in terms of the lane checkers, those virologists and infectious disease doctors who thought they knew better, they did not. And because they dismissed the other side, because their party line is that there is no airborne transmission for sources these coronavirus particles, that cost millions of lives. And I'm putting it out there. History will remember who you are. And it's not just the Bonnie Henrys of the world. We're talking about like academic scientists who downplay this. History will remember who you are. And I think if you're still going to play this lack of precautionary principle, then you're really, really guilty. You're wrong once. And if you still try to downplay, lane check, that will ultimately be not acceptable in the history books. And history will remember those people. And I really, really hope that we will have an accounting of what happened, right? That accurate history books will be written about this. And, I don't need to be in it. I'm just sharing data. And I think what really matters is who were the policy leaders who actually had the thumb on the policy, who were the advisors to the policy leaders, who were the people who are actually influencing these policy leaders the most, and then telling them you don't need airborne transmission guidance. Oh, surgical masks for healthcare workers are totally fine, whenever clearly that is not true. Shame on you for being wrong once and dismissing aerosol scientists. But second strike, if you try to, downplay and dismiss the precautionary principle, history will really judge you. And I really hope that there will be at least some justice and at least some accounting of what happened. So right now, let's move forward. Let's push our policy leaders to do better.
Mm-hmm.
And let's push our scientists to work together and not cherry pick the data and focus on precautionary principle. Because as Dr. Mike Ryan says, if you want to be right before you act, you will always lose. You'll never win against this pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
Perfection is the enemy of good. Move fast, have no regrets. That is the way to stop this pandemic or any pandemic. And so kudos to Dr. Mike Ryan. Hope that I get to meet him someday.
And I'd say I agree with you that, I think a lot of this is going to come back to bite some people. Misdeeds typically return to haunt. I think it's time I should let you go, Eric. Is there any other messages you want to throw out to anybody, and also where can people keep tabs on you?
You keep tabs on Twitter, at Dr. Dr. Eric Ding. That's my main platform. I have no YouTube channel, no website. You don't have to subscribe to anything. I would say the parting message is tell your public health leaders that the risk of long-term hospitalization and long COVID of kids and long COVID of any young adults is a price that's way too high. Don't just look at the deaths. Don't just look at the hospitalizations. COVID is a debilitating illness for many, many people. And do not just focus on how many empty hospital beds and ICU beds you still have free. If you use that as your moral compass, we would be living in a world run by Fountainhead and Rand activists who want no laws whatsoever. And that's not the society we want to live in. We want to live in a safe and just society. And safety and justice and public health go hand in hand. And with that, please advocate for our future generation, our children, and protecting them from long-term debilitating disease like COVID. So thank you so much.
Awesome. Thanks, Eric. Thanks for listening to this episode. The music you hear on this show is from the Jeff Lapp Trio out of Montreal. Find them at jefflapp.com. Shout out to Tara for doing the graphics for COVID On Air. A huge thanks to my editor, Jeff, at Bean Co. Studios in Regina, Saskatchewan. Please visit endcoronavirus.org for more information on ECV. Click on Join Us. Through that, you can volunteer with ECV, and you can subscribe to our newsletter, which is full of great information shot straight to your inbox from our delightful newsletter editor, Tracy. Also, please check out the blog at ECV, and hats off to Scott, our impeccable blog editor. You can find ECV on Facebook and Instagram and on Twitter at nCovid19. You can find me on Twitter at Mr. Farden. It's at MrFarden. Until next time.